My son announced his in-laws were moving into my house. Then his wife handed me a floor plan with my bedroom gone. The moment my son placed his fork beside his plate, I knew something was wrong. Not because he looked angry, because he looked prepared. He had rehearsed whatever he was about to say, and somehow, that hurt more than the announcement itself. "Dad," he said, tapping his glass once, "we've made a decision. Starting next month, Marissa's parents are moving in." I stared at him. Then his wife, Marissa, reached beneath the table and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She opened it. It was a floor plan of my house. My house. And beside my bedroom, written in neat blue ink, were the words, "Marcus and Marissa, Master Suite." Underneath it was another note, "Henry, downstairs room." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Marissa smiled. "Dad, don't look so worried. It's actually better for you. The downstairs room will be easier when you get older." My son avoided my eyes. That was when I understood something. They weren't asking me to let her parents move in. They had already decided that I was moving out of my own life. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply picked up the serving spoon and offered my son another piece of roast. He looked confused. "Dad, more potatoes?" I asked. "No. I mean, you're okay with this?" I looked directly at him. Of course. The relief on Marissa's face came instantly. Her father, Raymond, leaned back with a satisfied smile, while her mother, Elaine, began discussing curtains for the upstairs bedroom. They were already decorating, already measuring, already talking about what furniture of mine should be put into storage. And my son just sat there. My son. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager whose bicycle I repaired at midnight because he had promised his friends he would ride with them at sunrise. The man whose college tuition I had paid when he said he would pay me back. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye while his wife erased my name from my own bedroom. I glanced toward the hallway. My late wife, Evelyn, had once stood there holding a paintbrush and laughing because I'd accidentally painted half the wall the wrong shade of cream. She had been gone for 4 years. Yet every corner of that house still carried her fingerprints. And now these people were discussing it like a property they had inherited. I swallowed the ache in my throat. "There's just one thing," I said. Marissa stopped talking. My son finally looked at me. "What?" I smiled. "Nothing important." That answer seemed to satisfy them. But there was something they didn't know. For the past 11 years, I had kept a small black notebook hidden in my desk. Every loan, every check, every promise, every time my son had said, "Dad, I'll pay you back next month," I had written it down. And after tonight's dinner, I finally knew exactly why I had kept those records. Because before their moving trucks arrived, I was going to make one phone call that would change everything. I waited until the last car disappeared from the driveway before I closed the front door. The house became silent. Not peaceful. Silent. There is a difference. I stood in the kitchen with one hand resting against the counter, staring at the empty chairs where my son and his wife had been sitting only minutes earlier. They had left smiling. They thought they had just solved a housing problem. They had no idea they had just given me a deadline. 30 days. That was how long they had given themselves to turn my home into theirs. I walked over to the refrigerator and pulled down the photograph Evelyn and I had taken the year we moved into the house. We were younger then. She was holding a cardboard box. I was holding a toolbox. Neither of us had much money, but we had believed we were building something that would last. I touched the corner of the photograph. "I'm sorry, Evie," I whispered. Then I put it back. I wasn't apologizing for what I was about to do. I was apologizing because she wasn't here to see it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I made coffee. Then I opened the drawer beside my desk and took out the black notebook. The cover was scratched. The corners were bent. But every page inside was organized. Dates, amounts, signatures. I turned to the first entry. $9,400. That was the money I'd given my son, Nolan, when his car transmission died. He promised to repay me within 6 months. He never did. Next page. $2,750. Rent assistance. Then another. $6,300. Medical bills. Then another. And another. By the time I reached the final page, my jaw had tightened. The total was much larger than most parents would ever willingly admit. And beside that total was something even more important. A signature. Not mine. Nolan's. I closed the notebook. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. Her name was Margaret Hale. She had helped me purchase the house decades ago. When she answered, her voice immediately softened. Samuel? I almost laughed. Nobody had called me that warmly in a long time. Margaret, I need a favor. There was a pause. What kind? I need you to tell me what my house is worth. She went quiet. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. Are you thinking about selling? I looked toward the hallway. At the bedroom where Evelyn had slept. At the walls my son had apparently decided he could rearrange. Yes, I said. I am. Margaret didn't ask why. She simply told me she'd send someone over. That afternoon, a young couple came to inspect the property. The man's name was Daniel, and his wife was Claire. They weren't flashy. They didn't walk around pointing at furniture and discussing what they would throw away. Claire stopped in the garden. She noticed Evelyn's rose bushes. Those are beautiful, she said. They belong to my wife. Claire looked at me. Then I hope whoever buys this house understands they aren't just plants. I couldn't answer. My throat had tightened. I turned away and pretended to inspect the fence. Because that was the first time in years someone had understood what this house actually meant to me. The next morning, Claire and Daniel made an offer. Full asking price. No games. No delays. I signed the paperwork 3 days later. And then I did something that felt strange. I didn't feel afraid. I felt lighter. But I wasn't finished. There was still one thing I needed to arrange. Something that would make sure my son couldn't simply find another way to take control of my future. That evening, I called my former employer. They had been asking me to return as a consultant for months. I had always refused. Until now. The director answered immediately. Samuel, what changed? I looked through the window at Evelyn's roses. I'm ready, I said. After the call, I opened my notebook again. Then my phone rang. It was Nolan's wife. Her voice was cheerful. Almost frighteningly cheerful. Dad, just checking in. We need you to start clearing your closet this week. I stared at the notebook. Why? Because the movers need measurements. I slowly closed it. Sure, I said. Take whatever time you need. She laughed. You're so easy to work with. Then she hung up. I sat there alone. And for the first time, I realized something. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were already preparing to take possession of my home while I was still living in it. And 2 days later, they crossed a line I never thought my own family would dare to cross. Because when I came home that afternoon, 2 strangers were standing inside Evelyn's bedroom with a measuring tape in their hands. The measuring tape was stretched across Evelyn's bedroom window when I walked through the hallway. For a moment, I honestly thought I had entered the wrong house. 2 men I had never seen before were measuring the walls. One was checking the window frame. The other was writing numbers into a notebook. And standing beside Evelyn's dresser was Marissa, casually scrolling through her phone as if she were supervising a renovation project. Her mother, Elaine, was opening drawers. My wife's drawers. The same drawers where Evelyn had kept handwritten recipes, old birthday cards, and the tiny silver earrings she wore on our anniversary every year. I stopped in the doorway. Can someone explain what you're doing? The men immediately froze. Marissa looked up. Then she smiled. Oh, Dad, you're home early. Home early. Those words hit me harder than they should have. As though I was the visitor. As though this house already belonged to them. We're just taking measurements, she continued. The movers need exact dimensions. I looked at the 2 men. Then at Elaine. Then back at Marissa. Did you ask me before coming inside? Her smile weakened. Nolan gave us a key. Of course he did. My son had given his mother-in-law access to my house without asking me. I nodded slowly. Where's Nolan? He's working. That answer told me everything. He knew. Maybe he hadn't physically walked through that door, but he knew exactly what his wife was doing. I stepped farther into the bedroom, and then I saw it. The photograph. My wedding photograph. The one Evelyn and I had taken 32 years earlier. It had always hung beside the bedroom door. Evelyn was laughing in it. Not smiling. Laughing. Her head was tilted back, her eyes nearly closed, and I remembered exactly why she had laughed that day. The photographer had told me to look romantic. I had apparently looked terrified instead. Evelyn never let me forget it, but now the photograph was lying face down on the dresser. I stared at it. Elaine glanced over. Oh, that! She picked it up. We needed the wall clear. Something inside me went completely still. I walked toward her. Put it back. She blinked. What? The photograph. Her expression hardened. It was just in the way. Put it back. This time my voice was quieter. Elaine slowly placed it against the wall. I picked it up myself. I wiped a tiny streak of dust from the glass with my thumb. Then I hung it exactly where it had been. Marissa sighed. Dad, you're making this more emotional than it needs to be. I looked at her. No. I pointed toward the photograph. You made it emotional. She rolled her eyes. And that's when I noticed the camera above the hallway entrance. A small black lens. Marissa noticed me looking at it. Her expression changed. Just slightly. I smiled. You know what that camera records? She didn't answer. Everything. The two men looked at each other. I continued. Every time that back door opened. Every person who walked through it. Every box that was carried inside. Every conversation that happened near the hallway. Marissa's face lost some color. Elaine immediately became defensive. We haven't done anything wrong. I didn't say you had. I looked at the camera. Then back at her. But I'm glad you mentioned it. Nobody spoke. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I asked the workers to leave. They hesitated. Marissa tried to protest. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply stood there. Eventually, they packed their tape measure and walked out. Elaine followed. Marissa remained behind for a few seconds. She stared at me. You're making a mistake. I smiled. Maybe. She stepped closer. You need your family. That sentence hurt. Because there had been a time when I believed it. I looked at her and thought about every night I'd sat beside Nolan when he was sick. Every bill I'd paid. Every time I'd rescued him from a problem he promised would be the last. And suddenly I understood. They weren't moving into my house because they wanted to help me. They were moving in because they believed I had nowhere else to go. Marissa left. I locked the door behind her. Then I walked into my office. I opened the black notebook, and beneath the final amount, I wrote one sentence. No more loans. No more rescues. No more excuses. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Nolan. Dad, please don't make this difficult. We're family. I stared at those words for nearly a minute. Then I opened the message Margaret had sent me earlier. The sale paperwork was ready. Everything was moving exactly as planned. But there was one problem. The buyer wanted possession sooner than expected, which meant my son and his in-laws might discover the truth before they were ready. And the next morning, I received a message that made me realize they had already started planning their move. 2 moving trucks had been booked for the exact day they thought they were taking over my house. The moving trucks were booked for a house that no longer belonged to them. But Nolan didn't know that. Marissa didn't know that. And neither did her parents. I knew. That was the strange part. Every time they talked about the move, I had to fight the urge to tell them the truth. Not because I wanted to hurt them. Because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go when they believed I had no power left. For the next several days, I became almost invisible. I went to work 3 days a week. I packed my belongings after dark. I wrapped Evelyn's journals in old towels and placed them carefully into boxes. Her photographs went into another box. The ugly little ceramic vase she'd made at a community art class went into my truck. It was crooked. The paint was uneven. And I loved it more than anything expensive I'd ever owned. Some nights, I would sit on the edge of the bed and stare at those boxes. I wasn't just packing a house. I was packing 32 years of marriage. That was the part Nolan would never understand. To him, it was a house. To me, it was where his mother had danced barefoot while cooking dinner. Where she had marked his height on the kitchen wall. Where we had argued about money, laughed about stupid things, celebrated birthdays, buried bad memories, and built a life from almost nothing. I couldn't simply hand it over. So I found another way to leave it. One afternoon, I called my old friend Harold Mercer. Harold ran a small storage facility outside the city. Ethan, he said, you sound like a man about to disappear. Not disappear, I replied. Just relocate. He laughed. Then I asked him whether he had a space available. He did. But before hanging up, he mentioned something I hadn't expected. By the way, we've got our community clearance coming up next Saturday. What kind? Donation clearance. Anything abandoned in certain units gets collected and distributed through a local charity. I stopped. People know about it? It's posted on every unit door. Big notice. Nobody can miss it. I stared through my office window. Then I looked at the boxes stacked against the wall. Good, I said. Harold chuckled. You're plotting something, aren't you? No. A pause. That's exactly what a man plotting something would say. I smiled. Maybe he was right. The following morning, Marissa called. Dad, we need another favor. I closed my eyes. Go ahead. Could you move some of your larger things into storage before the movers arrive? I almost laughed. They wanted me to clear out my own house, so they could move in more easily. Sure, I said. Whatever makes things easier. Her voice immediately brightened. You're the best. Those 3 words used to make me feel loved. Now they sounded like a receipt. After we hung up, I opened the notebook. There were years of numbers inside. Money I'd given Nolan. Money I'd given Raymond. Bills I'd covered. Promises they had made. And signatures proving those promises had existed. I calculated the total again. Then I compared it with the amount I was receiving from the house. The numbers were frighteningly close. That couldn't be ignored. I called my attorney. He reviewed everything carefully. Then he said something that made me sit back in my chair. Ethan, don't threaten them. Don't announce anything. Let the paperwork speak for itself. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. No screaming. No dramatic confrontation. No revenge speech. Just consequences. That evening, I drove to the new place I'd arranged for myself. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even close. It was a modest lakeside RV site where I could finally fulfill a promise Evelyn and I had made years earlier. She had once pointed at an RV brochure and said, "Someday, Ethan. Just pack a few things and go." I had always told her someday would come. It never did. Until now. I placed her rose bush beside the RV door. The oldest one. The rose she had planted when we first moved into our house. I touched one of its leaves. I'm finally doing it, Evie. My voice cracked. Just not the way we imagined. For the first time since she died, I allowed myself to cry without trying to hide it. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Nolan. Dad, we're coming over Sunday to finalize everything. I stared at the screen. They thought Sunday was about finalizing their move. They had no idea that Sunday was the day I had decided to stop being their safety net. And before the week was over, I would hand someone else the keys to the house they were already calling theirs. Sunday arrived quietly. That was what made it strange. I had expected some feeling of dread. Instead, I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and stood by the kitchen window watching the first light touch the garden. The house looked exactly as it always had. That almost broke me. The same cabinets. The same worn floor. The same rose bushes Evelyn had planted decades ago. But underneath all that familiarity, something had already changed. The house was no longer mine. The sale had closed. The paperwork was finished. And the people who now legally owned it were Claire and Daniel. I had arranged a short period before handing over possession, which gave me enough time to move my things and leave without turning the entire situation into a public fight. My son knew none of it. At least, I thought he didn't. At 9 that morning, I loaded the final boxes into my truck. Evelyn's journals. Our photographs. My mother's cast-iron skillet. A small box of letters. And the terracotta pot containing the oldest rose bush in the garden. I carried that one myself. When I placed it in the passenger seat, I looked at the empty seat beside me. For one painful second, I imagined Evelyn sitting there. She would have complained about my driving. Then she would have asked whether I'd remembered the coffee. I smiled despite the ache in my chest. Almost there, Evie. At 11, Claire and Daniel arrived. Claire stepped through the doorway and stopped. She looked around slowly. "This house feels like someone loved it," she said. I swallowed. She did. Claire understood immediately. She didn't ask me to explain. Instead, she followed me into the garden. I showed her the rose bush. "This is the oldest one." She crouched beside it. "Your wife planted it." I nodded. Claire touched one of the leaves. "Then I'll keep it alive." That sentence nearly destroyed me. I looked away because I didn't want a stranger to see me cry. Daniel walked over with a set of documents. "Everything is ready." I nodded. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "We're changing the locks today." My hand tightened around the truck keys. Not because I was angry. Because those keys had been in my pocket for more than 3 decades. I had used them when Nolan was a child. Evelyn had used them. They had opened this door through birthdays, funerals, Christmas mornings, hospital visits, arguments, reconciliations, and ordinary Tuesdays. And now they were about to become useless. I placed them on the kitchen counter, one by one. Then I looked around the room. I could almost hear Evelyn laughing. I could almost see Nolan as a little boy running through the hallway. For a moment, I wanted to call him. Tell him everything. Warn him. Give him one final chance to understand. But then I remembered the floor plan. My bedroom. Evelyn's room. His wife's handwriting. Marcus and Marissa, master suite. I let the thought go. I shook Daniel's hand. Claire hugged me. It surprised me so much that I nearly pulled away. Instead, I held her for a second. "Take care of it," I whispered. She knew I wasn't talking about the house. "I will." I walked outside. The door closed behind me. Then the locksmith arrived. A few minutes later, the locks changed. That tiny metallic click was louder than any argument could have been. I sat behind the wheel of my truck. The rose bush was beside me. And I finally drove away. But I didn't drive home. I didn't have one anymore. I drove toward the lake. Toward the small RV I'd purchased with part of the money from the sale. Toward the life Evelyn and I had promised ourselves years ago. When I arrived, I carried the rose bush outside and placed it beside the door. Then I sat down. For the first time in years, nobody was asking me for anything. No money. No favors. No explanations. Just silence. My phone buzzed. Nolan. I stared at his name. Then I answered. "Dad, where are you?" "I'm at the lake." "What do you mean, you're at the lake?" I said nothing. His voice became sharper. "Dad, we're supposed to come over tomorrow. Marissa already ordered everything. Her parents are ready. The trucks are booked." I looked at the rose bush. "Nolan." "What? Did you ever listen to the voicemail I left you?" Silence. Then, "What voicemail?" I closed my eyes. Of course. He hadn't listened. I had left him the truth. He had ignored it. "Never mind," I said. "Dad, you're acting weird. What's going on?" I almost told him. Then I heard another voice behind him. "Marissa, ask him about the master bedroom." My eyes closed. She still believed it belonged to her. "Dad," Nolan said, "we need to finalize the move." I took a slow breath. "Come tomorrow." "Okay. Good." He sounded relieved. Then I added quietly, "But bring everyone." He didn't understand. He wouldn't. Because tomorrow morning, when those two moving trucks pulled up to my old house, they would discover that the keys in their hands no longer opened the door. The next morning, I woke before 5. I didn't need an alarm. My body already knew something was coming. I made coffee and carried it outside the RV. The lake was almost perfectly still. A thin layer of mist hovered above the water, and somewhere across the shoreline, a bird called once and then disappeared into the quiet. I thought about Nolan. Not the grown man who had just tried to take over my house. The little boy. The boy who used to grab my hand whenever we crossed a busy street. I wondered when I had stopped being his father and started being his emergency fund. Then my phone rang. It was Nolan. I answered. "Dad." His voice was tense. "What's wrong?" "There's a woman standing at the house." I said nothing. "She says she owns it." I took another sip of coffee. "She does." "What?" "Her name is Claire. She bought the house." The silence on the phone lasted so long that I checked whether the call had dropped. Then Nolan whispered, "You sold it?" "Yes." "You sold our house?" I closed my eyes. "It was never our house, Nolan." His breathing became heavier. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "We were moving in today." "I know. Marissa's parents are already here." I looked out across the lake. "Then you should probably explain the situation to them." "Explain what situation?" "That they don't own the house." His voice cracked. "You did this without telling us?" I almost laughed. "I tried." "What?" "I left you a voicemail." "You knew we were moving." "Yes." "Then why didn't you stop us?" That question stayed with me. Because there it was. The truth. He wasn't asking why I sold the house. He was asking why I had allowed him to make a fool of himself. I answered softly. "Because you're 39 years old, Nolan. I shouldn't have to stop you from walking into a locked door." He didn't respond. Then I heard shouting in the background. "Raymond." His voice thundered through the phone. "Tell him we're not leaving." Another voice. "Marissa." She sounded panicked now. "Where are the keys?" "Nolan, try the back door." I put my coffee down. "Is that Marissa?" "Dad, please." "Did she bring the movers?" "Yes." "How many trucks?" "2." I looked toward the road. "Then move them." "What?" "Move the trucks." "Why?" "Because there's a red curb in front of that property. You can't leave commercial vehicles there." He went silent. Then came the unmistakable sound of someone asking another person, "What does that mean?" I could hear Raymond shouting again. Then Marissa said, "Dad, stop making this worse." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then Nolan spoke again. "Dad, you can't do this to us." I stared at the rose bush beside my RV. "You did this to yourselves." I ended the call. For several minutes, I sat there with both hands around my coffee cup. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. Because revenge sounds powerful when you imagine it. But when the person on the other end of it is your own child, there is no clean victory. There is only the realization that something between you may never be the same again. Around noon, my friend Harold called. "Ethan," he said, trying very hard not to laugh, "you might want to sit down." "Why?" "Because your son's in-laws are having a terrible morning." I leaned back. "Tell me." Apparently, Raymond had spent nearly 20 minutes trying to unlock the front door. He kept insisting the key was correct. Claire stood inside the doorway. Calm, patient, unmoved. Every time Raymond demanded to be let inside, she repeated the same sentence. "I understand you're upset, but this is our home." Then one of the moving trucks had been ticketed. The second followed shortly afterward. And that wasn't even the worst part. Because while all of them were arguing on the sidewalk, someone had recorded everything. A neighbor. A woman who had lived across from my house for years. And she had seen enough to know exactly what was happening. Harold paused. "Ethan?" "Yes. There's something else." "What?" "Your daughter-in-law posted a video online." My stomach tightened. "What kind of video?" "She's telling everyone you threw your own son and 2 children onto the street." I stared at the lake. There it was. The part one had been hoping to avoid. They weren't just angry. They were going to rewrite the story. And for the first time since I sold the house, I wondered if staying silent had been a mistake. Then Harold said, "Don't worry. Someone already found the footage from your security camera." I sat upright. "Who?" "Claire." I felt my pulse change. Because if that recording became public, everyone would finally see what happened inside my house before the moving trucks ever arrived. And I suddenly realized something even more dangerous. The footage didn't just show them entering my home. It showed exactly what they did to Evelyn's room. By Sunday afternoon, the story had already spread. Not the truth. The version Marissa wanted people to believe. She had posted a short video claiming that I had sold the family home without warning, leaving my son, her parents, and the children standing outside with nowhere to go. She cried while recording it. Not loudly. That would have looked fake. Instead, she used the soft, trembling voice people instinctively trust. "We never thought a grandfather could do this to his own family," she said. That sentence bothered me more than the accusation. Not because it was true. Because she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't explaining what happened. She was creating a villain. Me. I watched the video once. Then I shut my phone off. I wasn't going to fight emotion with emotion. But Claire had seen it too. And Claire knew the truth. Less than an hour later, she sent me a message. "Mr. Mercer, I think people should see what happened before moving day." Attached was a video. My security footage. I opened it. There was Marissa walking through my back door. Behind her came Elaine. Then 2 men carrying measuring equipment. The timestamp appeared in the corner. Clear. Unmistakable. They weren't arriving to visit me. They were entering my house to prepare for their move. Then the camera captured something that made my chest tighten. Elaine walked into Evelyn's bedroom. She looked around. Then she removed my wife's wedding photograph from the wall. She placed it face down on the dresser. Not carefully. Not respectfully. Just out of the way. I stopped the video. I couldn't breathe for a moment. That photograph had survived everything. 3 decades. A house fire in the neighborhood. 2 moves before this one. Evelyn's illness. Her death. And now it had been treated like an obstacle. I pressed play again. The footage showed me entering the room. It showed the conversation. It showed me asking how they had gotten inside. And it showed something else. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten them. I didn't throw anyone out violently. I simply asked them to leave. Then the footage ended. I stared at the screen. "That's enough," I whispered. Claire had already posted it. She didn't add a long explanation. Just the footage. Within minutes, the comments beneath Marissa's video changed. People started asking questions. Where was the warning? Why were they already measuring rooms? Why had they entered the property before moving day? Why had the bedroom photograph been removed? Then our neighbor, Mrs. Bellamy, shared the video. She had lived across from me for 17 years. Her caption was short. "For everyone asking what happened before the trucks arrived, watch this." That was all it took. By late afternoon, Marissa deleted her post. Then her account disappeared. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. At 6:30, my phone rang. Nolan. I stared at his name. This time I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he said, "Dad." His voice was different. There was no anger. No accusation. Just exhaustion. I saw the video. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I leaned back in my chair. I tried. No. Why didn't you tell me everything? I looked at the lake. Because the answer was painful. Because I wanted you to choose for yourself. He breathed shakily. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Dad, I don't know what I've done. My eyes closed. For years, I had wanted to hear my son admit that. But hearing it now didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing beside the wreckage of something I had spent decades building. Where are you? I asked. At a motel. Where's Marissa? She's gone to her friends. And your in-laws? Silence. Then, they're blaming me. I almost smiled. Of course they were. But I didn't say it. Instead, I told him, meet me tomorrow morning. Why? Because there's something else you need to see. What? I looked toward the black notebook sitting on my table. For 10 years, I had documented every dollar I'd given him. Every promise. Every signature. Every debt. And now I was finally going to open that notebook in front of him. Nolan, I said quietly, tomorrow we're going to talk about money. His breathing changed. What money? I stared at the cover. The money you said you'd pay back. He went silent. Then I added, and the money your father-in-law signed for. The call ended without another word. I sat alone in the RV, staring at that notebook. I knew what would happen next. Nolan would finally learn that the house wasn't the only thing I had taken back. There was one final account between us. And when I opened that notebook the next morning, the total on the last page was almost exactly the amount they believed I had stolen from them. The next morning, Nolan arrived alone. He looked older than he had the week before. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were red. And when he sat across from me inside the RV, he didn't immediately ask about the house. That told me something had changed. I placed the black notebook on the table. Nolan stared at it. Dad, he whispered, what is that? You know what it is? He shook his head. No, I don't. I opened it. The first page contained his signature. $9,400. Your transmission, I said. He looked away. I turned the page. Another amount. Then another. Money for rent. Money for repairs. Money for bills. Money I had handed him whenever his life became difficult, and he came to me saying the same thing. Just this once, Dad. I kept turning pages. Nolan's breathing became heavier. Finally, I reached the section where his father-in-law had borrowed from me. I placed my finger beside the signature. Your father-in-law signed this. Nolan stared at it. Then he whispered, how much? I told him. His face changed. He finally understood. For years, they had treated me like an endless source of rescue money. They had believed that because I was his father, I would always absorb the consequences. But the total I had documented was almost equal to what I had received from selling the house. I looked at him. I didn't take your inheritance, Nolan. His eyes lifted. There was never an inheritance. That sentence broke something inside him. He covered his face with both hands. For several seconds, I heard nothing except his breathing. Then he whispered, I thought you would always be there. I was. He looked at me. I was there every time you needed me. My voice softened. But being there for you became the reason you never learned to stand. His eyes filled. I could see the little boy inside the exhausted man sitting across from me. And despite everything, I still loved him. That was the cruelest part. I wasn't throwing away my son. I was finally refusing to carry him. I closed the notebook. I am not taking you to court, I said. I'm not demanding another dollar today. Nolan looked confused. Then why keep all this? Because love without boundaries becomes a debt nobody knows how to repay. He lowered his head. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he asked quietly, where are you living? I pointed outside. He followed me. The rose bush stood beside the RV, its leaves bright beneath the morning sun. Nolan stopped. His eyes immediately changed. Mom's rose. I nodded. He touched one of the leaves. She wanted to travel, he whispered. I know. She never got to. I know. His shoulders began shaking. And then my son cried. Not the angry tears of a man who had lost a house. The tears of a child finally realizing how much time he had wasted. I put my hand on his shoulder. We can't change yesterday. He wiped his face. Can I come back? I looked at him carefully. Not to live here. His expression fell. But you can come as my son. He looked at me. And Orion can come fishing whenever he wants. For the first time that morning, Nolan smiled. Small. Broken. But real. A few weeks later, he found a job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what he had imagined for himself, but it was his, and that mattered more. One morning, I received his message. Dad, I got the job. I'm gonna make this work. I read it twice. Then I looked beside the RV. The rose bush had finally opened. One deep red flower, the same color Evelyn had loved. I sat beside it with my coffee. For years, I had mistaken rescuing people for loving them. Now I understood the difference. Sometimes love means opening your door. Sometimes love means helping someone stand. And sometimes love means finally closing a door they were never entitled to walk through whenever they wanted. I didn't sell the house because I hated my son. I sold it because I finally remembered that my life belonged to me too. The house was gone. The money was settled. The debts were documented. But something far more valuable remained. My son's chance to become the man I had always believed he could be. I looked across the lake. The water was completely still. And for the first time in years, I felt no anger. Only peace. Evelyn had wanted one more summer. I couldn't give her that, but I could finally live the life we had postponed for so long. I touched the rose gently. I'm finally here, Evie. Then I smiled. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's simply refusing to lose yourself anymore. And if my son ever asks why I let him believe he was moving into my house when I already knew the truth, I'll give him the answer he needed all along. Because Nolan, I spent 39 years opening doors for you. It was time you learned how to open your own.